The train screeched into Brier Hollow, coughing smoke into the already dusty sky. One by one, passengers spilled onto the cracked platform, laughing, calling out, waving to familiar faces. But one woman stood apart. Her shawl, one a proud shade of blue, hung limp and tattered around her. Boots too big slapped awkwardly against the ground with every hesitant step. The hem of her dress was ripped and blackened with soot, and a fading bruise marked the edge of her jaw, half concealed by her scarf. When the station clerk called out, "Name," she blinked like she hadn't heard. The man repeated it, softer. "I don't have one," she rasped, her voice brittle as dry leaves. The clerk frowned, but something in her hollow stare made him think better of pressing. With a shrug, he handed her a crumpled slip and moved on to the next arrival. She wandered through the crooked streets of Brier Hollow, clutching a fraying cloth bag to her chest like it held her last breath. Children pointed. A butcher spat at the ground near her feet, and when she knocked at the boarding house door, the woman inside slammed it shut without a word. By nightfall, she had nothing. No food, no welcome. Only a patch of dirt behind the general store to call her own. She curled up there, her bag under her head, as the stars stared coldly down, offering no comfort. If you believe no one should be left alone to fight their battles, comment respect to honor those forgotten souls who kept walking even when the world turned its back. Stick around. The journey ahead will leave a mark on your heart. The night pressed down heavy on Brier Hollow, thick with the stink of whiskey and the careless laughter of men who'd long since forgotten how to be decent. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and shrank further into the shadows behind the general store. Her stomach twisted in hunger, but it was fear that kept her eyes wide open. Footsteps staggered down the alley. "There she is," a voice slurred. "Pretty thing," another one jeered. "Bet she'd be grateful for a little company." Their boots scraped closer, heavy and unsteady, and she fumbled for the jagged piece of glass she'd hidden in her boot. A poor weapon, but all she had. Her fingers trembled. Then, just as the first man stumbled toward her, a shadow separated from the deeper dark. Tall, broad, silent. The drunken men faltered. Elias Mercer. One of them hissed under his breath, the name sharp with fear. Neither of them stayed to test their luck. They scattered like startled rats, vanishing into the night, leaving only the bitter stink of fear and cheap liquor behind. She peered cautiously from behind the crates. The man didn't move. He stood there, framed by the moonlight, heavy coat brushing the ground, battered boots planted firm. He didn't speak. He didn't step closer. He simply watched her for a moment longer than comfort allowed. Then he turned and walked away, his boots fading into the night. The next morning, Brier Hollow buzzed like a kicked beehive. "She's trouble, mark my words," sneered the woman at the bakery. I heard Elias looked at her. "Stared her down good," muttered the blacksmith. "No, decent man meddles with strays," someone else whispered. But Elias Mercer had never cared for the judgment of cowards. And neither, she realized, could she afford to. The day dragged slow and cruel. By noon, the sun beat down like a punishment, and the dusty streets of Brier Hollow offered no shelter. She drifted from one storefront to the next, asking for work, sweeping floors, washing linens, even hauling coal. But each time, she was met with the same cold stares, the same tight-lipped refusals. "Don't need help," the baker snapped before she even finished asking. "No name, no pass, no thanks," muttered the man at the feed store. By sundown, her body ached from more walking than she'd done in days. Her head throbbed with thirst. She made her way back toward the alley behind the general store, the only place that had tolerated her so far. As she stumbled toward her worn patch of earth, she caught movement from the corner of her eye. She tensed instinctively, but it wasn't one of the drunkards. It was him. Elias Mercer stood just a few paces away, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his battered hat. For a long breath, neither of them moved. The air between them stretched thin, humming with something she couldn't name. Not danger, not safety, something else. Slowly, Elias lifted his hand. Not threatening, not commanding, just offering. An invitation, silent but sure. She stared at his outstretched hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. No one had offered her anything without asking for something back. Not in a very long time. And yet, something inside her, the last fragile piece that hadn't broken, reached out. Her fingers brushed his. Rough, solid, real. Without a word, Elias turned, leading her away from the square, away from the staring eyes and whispered curses. Not down the main road, but around the town's edge where the scrub and dirt swallowed up the trail, where no one from Brier Hollow would follow. The trail twisted into the foothills, where the land grew harsher and the town lights vanished behind them like a memory best forgotten. Neither of them spoke. Only the sound of Elias's boots crunching over dry earth and the distant call of a hawk overhead broke the stillness. When they finally reached it, the cabin looked less like a home and more like a scar left by time, low to ground, swallowed by climbing vines, with smoke curling wearily from the chimney. There was no welcome mat, no flowers in the windows, just a battered front door, hanging stubbornly on its hinges, like everything else in this place. Elias dismounted, tied his horse, and swung open the cabin door without a word. He glanced back once, a look that wasn't command, but wasn't quite a question either. Heart hammering, she stepped inside. The air smelled of cedar smoke and damp earth. A fire smoldered low in the stone hearth, casting restless shadows across the wood plank walls. 2 rooms, one narrow with a cot, another wide, heavy bed tucked beneath a patchy quilt. Elias set a chip basin of water on the table and pointed to the smaller cot. Beside it, a plate of beans and bread sat cooling, as if he'd expected her all along. She hesitated, years of distrust urging her to bolt, but hunger made the choice instead. Her hands trembled as she sat. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely more than breath. "Why are you helping me?" Elias didn't answer. He simply nodded toward the food, then turned away, disappearing into the second room without a sound. In this cabin, it seemed there were no questions, no names, no demands for past too painful to explain. Only the small, stubborn promise of warmth against the cold. And for now, that was enough. The days slipped into a quiet rhythm. She rose with the pale light of dawn, swept the dirt floor, mended a torn curtain no one would see, boiled weak tea to chase the chill from her bones. Elias said little, a nod here, a spare word there, but each evening he returned from somewhere beyond the ridge, carrying firewood or wild potatoes tucked in the crook of his arm. He never spoke of where he went, and she, respecting the heavy silence between them, never asked. But curiosity, like hunger, eventually gnawed too deep to ignore. One evening, when the sky turned bruised and the hills stretched out like slumbering giants, she followed him. She kept her distance, careful to stay behind the scrub trees and thorny brush. The wind tugged at her skirt, trying to betray her with every step. Elias stopped at the edge of a rocky clearing. There, 2 rough wooden crosses jutted from the earth, their edges weathered by wind and rain. One tall, one heartbreakingly small. Elias knelt between them. He didn't pray. He didn't speak. He simply sat, head bowed, shoulders drawn tight as a pulled rope. The sight hit her like a stone to the chest. The graves were unmarked, but they didn't need names to scream their story. A woman, a child. She shifted her weight, and a twig snapped beneath her boot. Elias's head jerked up, his sharp gray eyes pinning her where she stood. For a long, frozen moment, neither moved. Then his voice cut through the cold air, low and firm. "Don't follow me." Her cheeks burned with shame. "I'm sorry," she whispered. She stumbled back the way she came, heart thudding painfully in her chest. Some grief, she realized, demanded silence, and Elias Mercer carried more than his share. The shame of being caught gnawed at her, hollowing out what little strength she had left. That night, while the cabin creaked and the fire spit low embers onto the hearth, she packed her few belongings, a threadbare shawl, a heel of bread, a broken comb, into the cloth bag she had carried since the day she arrived. She couldn't stay, not after trespassing on his grief. Before the first breath of dawn, she slipped out the door, her boots crunching lightly over frostbitten ground. The cold bit at her cheeks, but she pressed on, stumbling down the narrow mountain trail that had once led her here. The world stretched wide and merciless around her. By mid-morning, the sun burned harsh against her back. Her legs quivered with every step, and the bag that once felt weightless now pulled at her shoulder like an anchor. She pushed further, past twisted trees and dry riverbeds, further from the safety of Elias's silent kindness, further from the fire, further from the bread left warm on the table. The ground beneath her blurred. Her knees buckled. She collapsed into a patch of brittle grass. Too weak to cry out, too tired to even curse herself for leaving. The sky tilted and spun overhead, and somewhere at the edge of hearing, she thought she caught the beat of approaching boots. Steady, unhurried. When her blurred vision cleared, he was there. Elias Mercer, without a word, stooped and lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing more than a wisp of smoke. His coat smelled of cedar and cold wind. She didn't resist. She couldn't. Cradled against his chest, she let herself be carried back toward the only place that had offered her shelter, the cabin tucked into the ribs of the mountain. When she woke again, it was to the soft crackle of the fire and the heavy weight of a quilt pulled up to her chin. The cot she remembered was gone. She now lay in the wide bed, the one she'd never dared even glance at before. The room smelled of cedar, of smoke, and faintly of bread. Something warm, something human. She shifted slightly and spotted him. Elias Mercer, slouched in a chair by the window, boots still dusty, arms crossed over his chest in a restless sleep. He hadn't left her. Through the haze of weakness, gratitude stirred somewhere deep inside her. Over the next few days, time blurred into simple kindnesses. Cool cloths pressed her forehead when fever gripped her. A bowl of broth left by the bedside, always refilled without a word. A sturdy hand steadying her when her legs trembled too badly to stand on their own. Elias spoke little. She spoke even less. But something unspoken built itself quietly between them, a bridge made of silence, not needing the brittle crutch of words. One afternoon, when the fever had finally broken and strength began to seep slowly back into her bones, she wandered the small cabin, near the wardrobe, half hidden behind work shirts and an old winter coat. She found it, a child's blue dress, its lace collar yellow with age, its buttons delicate and careful. Her fingers, trembling, pushed deeper into folds of fabric. Behind the dress, tucked carefully into a corner, sat a small wooden horse. Its edges worn smooth by time, but on its belly, carved in a child's uneven hand, was a name, Wren. She pressed the toy against her chest, her throat tightening. Elias carried more ghosts than he ever let show. And somehow, now, she was carrying them too. That night, the wind howled against the cabin walls, slipping through the cracks like a restless spirit. She sat curled in the chair by the fire, a thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the flames dance and crackle. Across from her, Elias Mercer sat in silence, his hands busy cleaning the worn rifle that rarely left his side. Neither of them spoke. Neither needed to. The space between them was thick, with everything they didn't say. She traced the pattern of quilt stitched across her knees, feeling the pull of old memories, locked doors, harsh voices, bruises that never fully faded. She wondered if he could hear the echoes of her past crackling between the logs on the fire. Elias set the rifle aside and leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. In the flickering light, the scars along his jaw looked deeper, harder, reminders of a man who had fought battles he never bragged about. She caught him staring into the fire, jaw clenched tight, as if some memory far heavier than wood or stone was pressing against him. Slowly, she spoke, her voice raw, stripped bare. "I couldn't stay where I was," she said. "It wasn't safe." Elias didn't look at her, but his hand tightened briefly into a fist before releasing. A long moment passed. Then he spoke, voice low and steady, more smoke than sound. "I couldn't save them," he said simply. She swallowed hard. There was no need to ask who. In that small, fragile moment, the weight of their separate sorrows found common ground. Two broken things, stitched loosely together by grief and the stubborn will to keep breathing. And though neither reached out, nor spoke of healing, somewhere in the spaces between them, trust began to grow. Quiet, steady, real. The first signs of trouble came with the dog's low growl, rumbling deep from under the porch. She was hanging damp clothes on a line strung between two cracked posts when she spotted him, a lone rider cutting up the trail toward the cabin, dust rising around the hooves of a heavy-set horse. The man wore a weathered brown coat and a tin star that caught the weak morning sun. Sheriff Amos Crowley. She froze, heart hammering against her ribs. Elias stepped out from behind the barn, rifle slung across his back, his face carved from stone. The sheriff tugged the reins, stopping a few paces short of the cabin. He tipped his hat, but the smile beneath it was cold. "Didn't expect to find you playing house, Mercer," Crowley drawled. "You're not welcome here," Elias said, voice low and steady. Crowley ignored him. His eyes settled on her, sharp and knowing. "Miss," he said, slow, like he was speaking to a child. "Folks back east are mighty worried. Judge's daughter vanished off a train. Big man, powerful name." Her throat tightened. "You belong to important people," Crowley continued, voice oily. "And the law says you need come home." She gripped the laundry line to steady herself. "I'm not going back," she said, barely above a whisper. Crowley laughed, a short, ugly sound. "That's not your choice, sweetheart. Your property and you're missing." Elias moved then, stepping between them, the barrel of his rifle angled low but ready. "She's not going anywhere," he said. Crowley's hand hovered near his holster, his mouth twitching with frustration. "I'll give you one chance," he warned. "Stand aside." Elias didn't move. Neither did she. "I'd rather die here than go back," she said, voice breaking but fierce. For a moment, the air crackled with the threat of violence. Then Crowley spat in the dirt, sneered, and tugged his reins hard. "This isn't over," he snapped, before turning his horse and riding back down the trail. But they both knew he'd be back. And next time, he wouldn't come alone. Night fell heavy and cold over the cabin, the stars hidden behind thick clouds. She couldn't sleep. Neither could Elias. Both sat by the fire, muscles tense, waiting for what they knew was coming. It didn't take long. The first sound was a distant thunder of hooves pounding against the hard earth, then lantern light bobbing through the trees. 3 riders this time, and at their head, Sheriff Amos Crowley, pistol already drawn. Elias was at the door before the first shout split the night. "I warned you, Mercer." Crowley barked. "This time, I'm taking her back, with or without your permission." Elias's hand gripped the rifle tight, his knuckles white. Behind him, she moved to the hearth, grabbing the old shotgun mounted on the wall. Her fingers trembled, but her heart was steady. Outside, Crowley and his men dismounted, fanning out across the clearing. The cabin's thin walls creaked under the weight of the moment. "You got no right to her," Elias called out, voice like granite. "She's not property." Crowley's answer came with a gunshot, a warning, a challenge. The night exploded into chaos. Elias fired first, clean and sharp. One of Crowley's men cried out, clutching his leg as he crumpled to the ground. She braced a shotgun against her shoulder and fired blind into the dark, the kickback jarring her teeth. A second man cursed and staggered backward, blood staining his sleeve. Bullets splintered the porch rail and punched holes in the siding. The dog barked furiously under the stairs. But Elias moved like a man who had nothing left to lose, calm, precise, relentless. Finally, Crowley realized the fight was lost. Breathing hard, face twisted in fury, he raised his hands. "Enough!" he shouted. Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle still trained steady. "Get off my land," he growled. Crowley snarled but mounted up, dragging his wounded men with him. The last they saw of him was his lantern swinging wild as he disappeared into the trees. Silence crashed down, thick and aching. Inside the battered cabin, she lowered the shotgun at last. They had fought together. And for the first time, she realized this place, these walls, this man, they were worth fighting for. The cabin bore the scars of the fight. Shattered porch rail, bullet punch holes through the siding, a door that hung crooked on its hinges. But it still stood, and so did they. The next morning, with smoke still lingering faint in the air, Elias fetched fresh cedar wood from a ridge. He worked in silence, mending the porch rail, straightening the door, patching the holes one by one. She helped where she could, sweeping away broken glass, scrubbing bloodstains on the floorboards, tending the battered hinges with hands that no longer trembled. It wasn't about making the cabin perfect. It was about making it theirs. A few days later, when the worst of the damage was repaired, Elias handed her a wrapped bundle. Inside was a hand-carved wooden sign, the letters rough but steady. Home, not Grady's place, not the Mercer cabin, just home. She traced the letters with her fingers, feeling the weight of that word settle deep into her bones. Together, they hung the sign above the newly mended door. It swung gently in the mountain breeze, catching the first light of the rising sun. That night, after Elias had fallen into a rare, deep sleep by the hearth, she pulled a single envelope from the bottom of her worn cloth bag. The last piece of her old life. A letter, a name, proof that she had once belonged to someone powerful, someone who now would see her as little more than lost property. She stepped out into the cool night, the stars bright and sharp overhead, with shaking hands. She fed the envelope into the fire pit, watching as the flames licked it clean from existence. Ashes danced into the dark sky, carried away on the wind. She didn't need that name anymore. She was choosing a different life now, and it had nothing to do with where she came from, only where she was going. Spring came slow to the hills, unfolding like a promise kept too long. The cold loosened its grip on the earth, and the creek by the cabin sang louder with each passing day. They fell into a rhythm, without ever speaking of it. Morning started with firewood stacked neatly by the hearth and bread rising soft in the kitchen. Evenings ended with the two of them sitting near the fire, not talking much, but not needing to. Elias would leave small things by her place at the table. A handful of wild berries, a smooth stone shaped like a heart, a folded piece of cloth for a new dress. No explanations, no expectations, just offerings, quiet and steady. She found herself answering without words. She stitched new curtains to the windows, wove thin wreaths of dried herbs to hang over the doors, and mended the tear in Elias's coat where a bullet had nicked it. No labels passed between them, no demand for declarations. Only the slow, careful rebuilding of two lives once broken at the edges. One morning, she woke to find a pair of boots sitting by the door. Small, worn just enough to be comfortable, but clearly meant for her. Tucked inside was a scrap of paper with only 6 words written in a careful, clumsy hand. For the one who walks beside me. She pressed the note to her chest, feeling something break open quietly inside her. Not pain this time, but something sweeter. Something she was still learning how to trust. The creek kept singing. The lavender she planted stubbornly pushed through the soft earth. Here, in this wild, quiet place, love didn't come with fire or thunder. It came in pieces, gentle, patient, and entirely their own. Seasons turned, as they always do. Down in Brier Hollow, folks talked less about the woman who had once arrived nameless and bruised. Life had a way of moving on, especially when people preferred forgetting things that didn't fit neatly into their stories. But every so often, a traveler would drift through the saloon on a dusty afternoon, boots scuffed, eyes wide with wonder. He'd lean in over a mug of stale beer and tell a tale. A cabin, they said, tucked high in the foothills where the hawks circled and the lavender grew wild. A man lived there, a man the town had once feared. And with him, a woman no one really remembered, except maybe in uneasy whispers. They didn't have a name for their home. No gates, no signs, no warnings. Just a place stitched together by stubborn hands, and the kind of trust too fragile to name. The traveler would say, if you look just right at sunset, you might catch a glimpse of them. 2 figures sitting on the porch steps, shoulders brushing, saying nothing at all and needing nothing more. Because in a world quick to judge, to brand, to discard, they had found something quieter, something stronger. Not rescue, not salvation, not even redemption, just the rarest kind of grace. To be seen without fear, to belong without explanation, to love without a past clawing at your heels. And maybe, in the end, that's what we all want. Not a rescue story written in flashing lights, but quiet place where no one looks away when they see the bruises we carry. Tell me, If you had no past to hold you back, no name, no debts, no shadows, where would you go? And who would you hope was waiting for you at the end of the road? Share your reflections in the comment below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and return for more stories where love rises from the quietest ashes.